You're watching Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. Sometimes when people look at women today, they think they should have more restrictions than in the time of the Prophet because society seems a lot more corrupt. But we're continuing our series on this person's book, al-Halim, Abu Shuqqah, where he says that's not really the case, that there were problems in the Prophet's time. It wasn't as Puritan a society as we imagine it to be, but the Prophet didn't respond with restrictions. He actually responded with mercy and understanding. So we're going to be looking at that now. With me is Dr. Shabir Ally. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Let's look at this book again. We are continuing a wonderful series that we're doing, talking about the neglected rights of Muslim women. This series really shows us some of the rights that we haven't ever thought about. You know, it looks at the Quran and it looks at the Hadith and it says, look, here are things that were happening in the time of the Prophet. Here is what God said. So treat your women better, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is part of his Abu Shuqqah's larger discussion in this 6th volume of the 8-volume series, in which he's saying that people have gone too far with the concept of al-dhara'i. Al-dhara'i in Arabic means blocking the means, and in this context, the means towards evil. And while this is a good concept, it can be overused and abused. And he's seeing that people have overused this concept, and they have tried to enact more legislation and impose more restrictions, especially on the movements of women, because they think that they're doing a good thing by blocking evil. But Abu Shuqqah is showing that example after example in our sources indicate that a balanced approach has to be taken. Yes, there are restrictions, and yes, there are penalties for committing heinous crimes, but you shouldn't go more than that, especially people thinking, okay, let's block this evil and block that evil and block that evil by this and that and more impositions. So let's look at some of the examples that he is going to give. Now, this is the extreme case where people commit adultery. So he shows in case after case, people are known to have committed adultery in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they were dealt with. Now, as a prelude, let me explain what is commonly known as the Islamic penalties for adultery. So the Quran in Surah 24, verse number 2 says, as for the adulterer, whether male or female, flog them each 100 lashes. In other traditions, apart from the Quran, there is a mention of stoning as a penalty for adultery, and it is unclear as to how this came to be like this. Was this prior to the Quran that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was administering such a punishment which was known from the previous scriptures? And he thought that, okay, if this is the Mosaic law, then I don't have anything specific from God about this, so I'm going to stick with that. So is it that he applied this penalty in the early days, and then when the Quran came giving that legislation about lashing, that became the governing rule, but people remembered the cases of the adulterer being stoned, and that's how they reported it. In any case, for Abu Shuqqah, the hadiths which relate this are in Bukhari and Muslim and other reputable sources. So he's taking them for granted.
Yes.
This is what happened. Now, taking them for granted, we can make the point that simply, if you think that enacting such strict penalties is going to result in eradicating the problem altogether, you're wrong, because here is it case after case of one person being killed for adultery, another person being killed, and so on. And yet, more and more cases are coming forward. So what's happening? To a certain extent, you have to accept that this is part of human nature. People will do this regardless of what restrictions you put in place. And
the Prophet Muhammad was even amongst them. It wasn't like
exactly.
he's distant or far, or the revelation is far from them. You know, he's receiving the revelation in their midst. They're still committing adultery, right?
Yes. And this is said to be the best of the generations, because the hadith says, خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. The best of generations is mine, and then the one that follows them, and then the one that comes right after them. So based on this, it is commonly accepted among Muslims that the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, meaning those who were Muslims in his lifetime and they met him, They are the best of generations. And then the one right after that, they're called the tabi'un, a special title, meaning the followers. And then the generation right after that, the tabi'in, the followers of the followers. So these three generations are said to be the best. Whatever happens in these three generations are taken to be precedent for what we should follow in later on. Not, of course, the bad things, like somebody committing adultery, but they're good things. So because they are like, the best of generations, right? And then corruption enters later on. So our society or our present day generation might be thought to be far removed from the ideal, but those were the ideal. The most ideal being those who lived and walked with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And yet we find that in that prime generation that there were people who fell into adultery. We're not saying they're bad people. We're saying, let's understand that you cannot have the ideal society that is totally Puritan.
Yes.
It will have flaws.
Besides adultery, Dr. Shabir, what other things were being committed that we know of in that time?
People did all kinds of things, all kinds of evils that
was
that
rape
are known.
common?
Rape. It so happened that a woman was going to the mosque and she was raped. And the point for Abu Shuqqah is that that did not lead to sweeping legislation to say, okay, now women should not come to the mosque because look, we don't want this to happen again. The standing order of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, saying, do not prevent the female servants of God from coming to the mosque, that remained despite this occasion of rape. Of course, the culprit was dealt with. He was caught and he was killed according to the custom of the time. You cannot go better than what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did. This should be the lesson. Other than this, there were so many cases of adultery. There is a mention of a man who came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he confessed that he had committed adultery. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, turned away from him. And he came again, and the Prophet turned away from him. And when he came the third time, that's when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ordered that he should be dealt with according to the laws of capital punishment for such a deed. In another instance, similar to this, a woman came and confessed to her adulterous deed. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, and must have come to understand that she is pregnant as a result. And perhaps it was the pregnancy itself that was showing, and she decided to come forward and confess. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, okay, come back to me after your baby is born, because she wanted the capital punishment to be applied to her then and there. So the Prophet asked her, come back when your baby is born. So she came back after the baby was born. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, according to this narrative, said, okay, come back after the baby is weaned, because the baby still needs you. So after a couple of years, she came back with the baby now with a bread in his hand. And that is when the punishment was meted out to her, according to the narrative. On another occasion, it is mentioned that the man came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said that he had kissed a woman. And the Prophet turned away from him. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, eventually offered the prayer, and the man joined in the prayer. Then afterwards, he called the man and said, okay, there's a verse in the Quran that says, observe the prayer at the two ends of the day. In al-hasanati yudhibna sayyat. The good deeds are going to wipe off the evil deeds. So because you prayed with me, you are forgiven. Right? So in ways like this, you're right. The Prophet, peace be upon him, meted out mercy rather than punishment. And as much as possible, he tried to avert the punishment, but people came forward and confessed because they wanted to be cleansed of their sins in this life by accepting the earthly punishment than to be punished by a greater punishment and perhaps one more lasting in the life hereafter. So if you take these narratives as they are, what they do indicate in some is that though the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had been enacting, you can say, or putting stops to the possibility of people falling into evil, people still fall into evil naturally, because that's just part of human existence. We are prone to error. And he applied a balanced means. There is legislation in the Quran about how to deal with the adulterer and the adulteress, and there are other prescriptions about, we mentioned some of them previously, but just to, in a nutshell, we can say, all right, you avoid situations in which people might easily fall into adultery, but at the same time, you have to be practical, and not all situations can be avoided. Otherwise, life would become impractical. And so to maintain pragmatism and to help people to function and have space to breathe and to interact in a healthy way, you are leaving yourself open to the possibility that some people will fall into error. But you just have to accept that. And sometimes we feel that we ourselves are good, but we're just trying to prevent the other people from falling into error, right? But if you do that with society, then you're just straight-jacketing society, and then you're losing other benefits. So you have to draw a line in between and say, okay, this is the balance that will incorporate all of the good that can come about from healthy interactions, and at the same time prevent most of the evil. But you can't prevent all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.